In a quiet suburban neighborhood, where everything seemed picture perfect, trouble was brewing. The houses were all neatly painted, the lawns trimmed to perfection, and even the mailboxes looked like they belonged in a magazine spread. It was the kind of place where people waved at each other over their fences but kept their drama behind closed doors. But not for long. On one side of the street lived a guy who preferred to keep things simple. Let's call him Alex. He wasn't flashy or loud, just someone who liked his weekends free to tinker with gadgets in his garage or sit on his porch sipping coffee while watching the world go by. Across the street, however, lived someone very different. She was what you might call an HOA Karen. You know the type, the person who seems to exist solely to enforce rules that no one else cares about. This particular Karen took her role as head of the Homeowners Association way too seriously. Karen had this uncanny ability to spot so-called violations that most people wouldn't notice if they stared at them for hours. A garden gnome placed half an inch too far to the left? Violation. House numbers slightly crooked? Another violation. And heaven forbid anyone dared to leave their trash cans out a little longer than usual. It was practically a crime against humanity according to her. But Alex became Karen's favorite target. Not because he was messy or rude, but because his trash cans seemed to offend her delicate sensibilities every week. Every Thursday morning, without fail, she would march across the street before the garbage truck arrived. At first, it started small. Maybe she'd nudge the bins a bit closer together or adjust them ever so slightly away from the curb. But then it escalated. Soon, she began knocking them over entirely. Sometimes the contents would spill onto the pavement, sending wrappers and old receipts scattering everywhere. Other times, she'd push the whole thing into the road, daring Alex to retaliate. Alex tried being polite. He left notes taped to the lids of the bins explaining how he followed all the HOA guidelines regarding placement. He even went out of his way to move the cans farther back from the curb after one particularly nasty incident involving soggy cereal boxes littering the sidewalk. But nothing worked. No matter what he did, Karen found some excuse to mess with his trash cans. Her reasoning? They're obstructing the beauty of our community. It didn't take long for Alex to realize that logic wasn't going to win here. Talking to Karen felt like talking to a brick wall, except the brick wall might have been more reasonable. So instead of continuing to plead his case, Alex decided to change tactics. If Karen wanted to make this personal, fine. But she hadn't seen anything yet. One evening, sitting in his living room surrounded by empty soda cans and crumpled sketches, Alex hatched a plan. What if, instead of fighting Karen directly, he gave her exactly what she deserved but in a way she'd never expect? Inspiration struck when he stumbled upon a video online showing off crazy DIY projects. That's when the idea hit him. What if he built a trash can so outrageous, so completely over the top, that Karen wouldn't know whether to scream or laugh? With newfound determination, Alex made a list of materials he'd need. Bright pink paint? Check. Glitter? Double check. Neon signs? Why not? Over the next few days, he enlisted the help of his best friend, who happened to be handy with tools and loved pulling pranks almost as much as Alex did. Together, they transformed a regular old trash can into something straight out of a fever dream. By the time they were done, the finished product was both hideous and hilarious, a towering monstrosity covered in glitter, flashing lights, and signs that read things like "Look at me." To top it off, Alex rigged up small speakers inside the lid to play cheerful jingles whenever the can was opened. Standing back to admire their work, Alex couldn't help but burst out laughing. Sure, it was ridiculous. But there was something oddly satisfying about creating something so absurdly perfect for the situation. This wasn't just any trash can, it was a statement. A middle finger disguised as a piece of art. And Karen? Well, she hadn't seen anything like it coming her way. Alex knew he was onto something big. The trash can he and his buddy had created wasn't just a joke, it was a weapon, albeit a very glittery and musical one. But before unveiling it to the world, or at least to Karen, Alex took a moment to think through the logistics. He wanted this to be more than just a prank, he wanted it to send a message. This wasn't about revenge, it was about showing Karen that her constant nitpicking and interference weren't going to ruin his peace of mind. If anything, it was going to backfire on her in the most spectacular way possible. The night before the grand reveal, Alex couldn't sleep. His mind raced with scenarios of how Karen might react. Would she explode in anger? Burst into tears? Or maybe, just maybe, she'd realize how ridiculous she was being. Deep down, Alex doubted that last part. People like Karen didn't tend to have moments of self-awareness, especially when they were convinced they were the moral compass of the neighborhood. Still, the thought of seeing her face when she came face to face with the glittering monstrosity brought a smile to his lips. Early the next morning, while the neighborhood was still quiet and wrapped in the soft glow of dawn, Alex wheeled the trash can out to its usual spot by the curb. He positioned it carefully, making sure it caught the light just right. The neon signs blinked cheerfully, and the pink paint sparkled under the street lamp like it belonged in a carnival rather than a suburban cul-de-sac. Alex stood there for a moment, admiring his handiwork. It was perfect. Absolutely, gloriously perfect. As the sun began to rise, Alex retreated to his porch, coffee mug in hand, and waited. He didn't have to wait long. Across the street, curtains twitched, and soon enough, Karen emerged from her house. She was wearing her signature floral bathrobe and fuzzy slippers, her hair pulled back into a messy bun. In one hand, she carried her clipboard, the ultimate symbol of her authority, and in the other, a pen poised like a sword, ready to strike down anyone who dared break the rules. Karen's eyes locked onto the trash can almost immediately. For a moment, she froze, her jaw dropping as if she'd just seen a UFO land in her driveway. Then, slowly, she started walking toward it, her steps deliberate and heavy. When she reached the curb, she stopped and stared, her expression a mix of disbelief, horror, and pure rage. Her mouth opened and closed several times, like a fish gasping for air, but no words came out. Finally, she found her voice. "What is this?" she screeched, pointing dramatically at the can as though accusing it of murder. Her voice carried across the street, loud enough to wake up anyone still sleeping. This abomination violates every single guideline in the HOA handbook." By now, curious neighbors had begun to peek out their windows or step outside to see what all the fuss was about. Some stood on their porches, sipping coffee and watching the scene unfold like it was a live episode of reality TV. Others lingered near their driveways, pretending to check their mail but clearly eavesdropping. A few kids even wandered over, giggling and snapping pictures of the outrageous trash can with their phones. Karen, oblivious to her growing audience, continued her rant. She paced back and forth, gesturing wildly as she listed off every reason why the trash can was unacceptable. "It's too tall. Too bright. Too loud," she shouted, punctuating each complaint with a jab of her finger. "And those lights, those blinking lights are a hazard to drivers. Not to mention the noise pollution." At that exact moment, the lid of the trash can creaked open, triggering the speakers inside to play a cheerful jingle. Karen froze mid-sentence, her face turning an alarming shade of red. Meanwhile, Alex leaned back in his chair, sipping his coffee and trying not to laugh too loudly. This was better than he'd imagined. Karen looked like she was about to implode, and the rest of the neighborhood was eating it up. One neighbor, an older man who rarely spoke to anyone, gave Alex a thumbs up from across the street. Another, a young mom pushing a stroller, grinned and said, "Well, I guess we know who wins this round." As the morning wore on, Karen's tirade showed no signs of slowing down. She paced around the trash can like a lion circling its prey, muttering furiously under her breath. Occasionally, she'd stop to glare at Alex, who simply raised his coffee cup in a mock toast whenever she did. The more worked up she got, the calmer Alex felt. He wasn't just winning this battle, he was enjoying it. But Karen wasn't done yet. By the time the garbage truck finally arrived, she had whipped out her phone and was furiously typing away, presumably drafting yet another official complaint to the HOA board. Alex watched as she marched back to her house, slamming the door behind her with enough force to rattle the windows. For a moment, the neighborhood fell silent, everyone waiting to see what would happen next. Later that afternoon, Alex received the first of what would become many letters from the HOA. Written in Karen's unmistakable handwriting, it outlined a laundry list of infractions: excessive noise pollution, thanks to the jingles, visual disturbances to the neighborhood aesthetic, and even a vague accusation of disrupting community harmony. Attached was a stern warning demanding that Alex remove the trash can immediately. Instead of feeling intimidated, Alex laughed. This was exactly what he'd hoped for. Karen had taken the bait, hook, line, and sinker. And now, the game was officially on. Over the next few days, Alex noticed subtle changes in the neighborhood dynamics. Neighbors who had once tiptoed around Karen, afraid of drawing her ire, began to loosen up. They'd stop by Alex's house to chat, offering words of encouragement or sharing stories about their own run-ins with her. Some even brought small gifts: a bag of chips here, a 6-pack of soda there, as tokens of appreciation for standing up to her. Karen, on the other hand, seemed to grow increasingly unhinged. She spent hours patrolling the streets, clipboard in hand, searching for any excuse to issue another violation notice. But instead of intimidating people into compliance, she only succeeded in making herself look petty and obsessive. Even her closest allies on the HOA board started to distance themselves, whispering behind closed doors about how she'd lost perspective. For Alex, the whole situation was surreal. What had started as a simple act of defiance had turned into something much bigger: a rallying cry for the neighborhood to take back control from someone who had ruled them with an iron fist for far too long. And at the center of it all was a trash can, a glitter-covered, music-playing, neon-lit trash can that had somehow become the unlikely hero of the story. As the days passed, Alex couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. He hadn't set out to start a revolution, but maybe that's exactly what the neighborhood needed. After years of living under Karen's oppressive rule, people were finally waking up to the fact that they didn't have to put up with her nonsense anymore. And if it took a ridiculous trash can to make that happen, then so be it. The morning after Alex rolled out his glittering, neon masterpiece of a trash can, the neighborhood woke up to something it hadn't seen in years: pure chaos. And Karen? Well, she was about to get more than she bargained for. It started early, too early. The sun had barely risen when Karen stormed out of her house, bathrobe flapping behind her like a superhero cape, clipboard clutched tightly in one hand. She marched across the street with the kind of determination usually reserved for people saving the world from imminent doom. But instead of a villain or catastrophe waiting for her, there was just the trash can. Sitting innocently by the curb, blinking its lights and practically glowing in the soft morning light. Karen froze mid-step, her mouth falling open as if she'd just walked into a room full of clowns. For a moment, she didn't move. Her eyes darted back and forth, taking in every detail: the bright pink paint, the glitter that sparkled obnoxiously under the street lamp, the neon signs that read "Look at me," and Karen's favorite. She blinked once, twice, then let out a sound somewhere between a gasp and a growl. "What is this?" she finally screeched, pointing at the trash can like it had personally insulted her. Her voice carried across the street, loud enough to wake anyone still sleeping. A few neighbors peeked through their curtains, curious about what could possibly make Karen lose her composure so early in the morning. One kid even stuck his head out of an upstairs window, phone in hand, ready to record whatever happened next. Karen wasn't done. Oh no, this was only the beginning. She circled the trash can like a detective examining a crime scene, jotting down furious notes on her clipboard. Every few seconds, she'd stop to glare at Alex's house, muttering things like "completely unacceptable" and "blatant disregard for community standards." Then came the yelling. Loud, dramatic, theatrical yelling. "This is a violation of every rule in the HOA handbook," she bellowed, pacing back and forth like she was giving a TED talk on suburban etiquette. This monstrosity is ruining the aesthetic of our entire neighborhood." She gestured wildly, as though the trash can had single-handedly destroyed property values and offended the gods of landscaping all at once. By now, a small crowd had gathered. Some neighbors stood on their porches, sipping coffee and watching the spectacle unfold. Others lingered near their driveways, pretending to check their mail but clearly eavesdropping. Kids, drawn by the commotion, wandered over to get a closer look. One brave child leaned down to inspect the trash can, poking at the glitter-covered surface before declaring, "Wow, this is awesome." Alex watched from his porch, trying and failing not to laugh. He raised his coffee mug in a mock toast whenever Karen glanced his way, which only made her angrier. Her face turned a shade of red that would put a tomato to shame, and her pacing grew faster, more frantic. The jingles coming from the trash can speakers didn't help matters either. Every time someone opened the lid to take a peek inside, cheerful music played, adding an almost cartoonish layer of absurdity to the situation. "Turn that off!" Karen shrieked, pointing at the speakers like they were some kind of evil contraption. But no one moved to comply. Instead, a teenager nearby grinned and pressed the lid again, triggering another round of jingles. Karen looked like she might explode. Her hands clenched into fists, and for a second, Alex wondered if she was going to throw her clipboard at the trash can or maybe at him. But Karen wasn't just mad, she was humiliated. This wasn't how things were supposed to go. In her mind, she was the enforcer of order, the protector of perfection. People were supposed to respect her authority, not laugh at her expense. Yet here she was, standing in front of a ridiculous, glittery trash can while half the neighborhood treated the whole thing like entertainment. As the morning wore on, Karen's tirade showed no signs of slowing down. She listed off every possible infraction she could think of, from excessive brightness to disruptive noise pollution. At one point, she accused the trash can of being a safety hazard because the blinking lights might confuse drivers. "Imagine if someone crashes into a tree because of this," she exclaimed, throwing her arms in the air for emphasis. No one mentioned that the nearest tree was 20 feet away and perfectly visible, even with the lights. Meanwhile, Alex noticed something interesting happening among the neighbors. At first, they seemed hesitant to engage, unsure whether to side with Karen or stay neutral. But as Karen's rant dragged on, the mood shifted. People started exchanging amused glances, whispering jokes to each other, and occasionally letting out quiet chuckles. One neighbor, an older man who rarely said much, gave Alex a subtle thumbs up from across the street. Another, a young mom pushing a stroller, leaned over to her friend and whispered, "Honestly, I think it's kind of funny." Even the kids couldn't resist joining in. They began decorating the trash can with balloons and streamers they'd brought from home, turning it into an impromptu art project. Parents didn't stop them, in fact, some encouraged it. By the time the garbage truck arrived later that morning, the trash can looked less like a violation and more like the centerpiece of a block party. Karen, oblivious to the growing rebellion around her, continued her lecture until she ran out of steam. When she finally stomped back to her house, slamming the door behind her hard enough to rattle the windows, the neighborhood erupted in quiet cheers. Neighbors high-fived each other, kids laughed as they ran back to their homes, and Alex tipped his coffee mug toward the group of people who had gathered near his driveway. Later that day, Alex received the first official letter from the HOA. Written in Karen's unmistakable handwriting, it outlined a laundry list of infractions: excessive noise pollution, thanks to the jingles, visual disturbances to the neighborhood aesthetic, and even a vague accusation of disrupting community harmony. Attached was a stern warning demanding that Alex remove the trash can immediately. Instead of feeling intimidated, Alex laughed. This was exactly what he'd hoped for. Karen had taken the bait, hook, line, and sinker. And now, the game was officially on. Over the next few days, the neighborhood buzzed with excitement. Neighbors who had once tiptoed around Karen, afraid of drawing her ire, began loosening up. They stopped by Alex's house to chat, offering words of encouragement or sharing stories about their own run-ins with her. Some even brought small gifts, a bag of chips here, a six-pack of soda there, as tokens of appreciation for standing up to her. Karen, on the other hand, seemed to grow increasingly unhinged. She spent hours patrolling the streets, clipboard in hand, searching for any excuse to issue another violation notice. But instead of intimidating people into compliance, she only succeeded in making herself look petty and obsessive. Even her closest allies on the HOA board started to distance themselves, whispering behind closed doors about how she'd lost perspective. For Alex, the whole situation was surreal. What had started as a simple act of defiance had turned into something much bigger, a rallying cry for the neighborhood to take back control from someone who had ruled them with an iron fist for far too long. And at the center of it all was a trash can, a glitter-covered, music playing, neon-lit trash can that had somehow become the unlikely hero of the story. As the days passed, Alex couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. He hadn't set out to start a revolution, but maybe that's exactly what the neighborhood needed. After years of living under Karen's oppressive rule, people were finally waking up to the fact that they didn't have to put up with her nonsense anymore. And if it took a ridiculous trash can to make that happen, then so be it. Karen wasn't about to let this go quietly. If anything, Alex's trash can had only fueled her determination to restore order to the neighborhood. She spent the next few days drafting letters, making phone calls, and organizing meetings with the HOA board. Her usual calm but authoritative demeanor was gone, replaced by a frenzied energy that made even her closest allies uneasy. It was clear to everyone that she was taking this personally, way too personally. One afternoon, Alex noticed Karen walking door to door, clipboard in hand, trying to rally support for her cause. She knocked on every house, explaining how the trash can was a blight on the community and demanding signatures for a petition to have it removed. At first, some neighbors hesitated, not wanting to openly oppose Karen. But as soon as she turned her back, they'd roll their eyes or share a laugh with whoever happened to be nearby. Slowly but surely, people began to realize something: Karen wasn't just overreacting, she was losing credibility. The more Karen pushed, the less effective she became. Instead of intimidating people into compliance, she started alienating them. One neighbor, an elderly woman who had always been polite to Karen, flat out refused to sign the petition. "You've got bigger problems than a trash can," she said firmly before closing her door. Another family laughed outright when Karen showed up at their doorstep. "We think it's kind of funny," the dad told her, shrugging. "Maybe you should lighten up." Even the kids in the neighborhood got involved, though not in the way Karen would have liked. They started treating the trash can like a local attraction, posing for photos with it and decorating it with balloons and streamers. Parents didn't stop them, in fact, some encouraged it. The trash can had become more than just a prank, it was a symbol of resistance against Karen's micromanagement. Every time someone added a new decoration or left a silly note taped to its side, it felt like another small victory. But Karen wasn't ready to admit defeat. She called an emergency HOA meeting, determined to make her case in front of the entire board. Flyers went up around the neighborhood announcing the gathering, and Alex couldn't help but chuckle when he saw one taped to his own mailbox. "This is gonna be good," he muttered to himself as he ripped it down. The meeting took place in the community center's basement, a drab, windowless room with fluorescent lights that buzzed faintly overhead. About a dozen neighbors showed up, along with the HOA board members, who looked visibly uncomfortable as Karen paced back and forth, clutching her notes. When it was finally her turn to speak, she launched into a dramatic monologue, complete with PowerPoint slides and charts detailing why Alex's trash can was unacceptable. This abomination violates multiple sections of our HOA guidelines," she declared, pointing at a slide featuring a blurry photo of the trash can. "It creates noise pollution, disrupts visual harmony, and sets a dangerous precedent for future violations. As she spoke, Alex leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, watching the spectacle unfold. He could tell from the looks on everyone else's faces that they weren't buying it. Some were stifling laughter, while others exchanged knowing glances. When Karen clicked to the next slide, a graph showing the increase in neighborhood complaints since the trash can appeared, the room erupted in giggles. At first, it was just a few chuckles, but soon the entire room was laughing uncontrollably. Even the HOA board members struggled to keep straight faces. Karen faltered, her voice cracking as she tried to regain control of the situation. "This isn't funny," she snapped, slamming her clipboard onto the table. "This is serious." But no one was listening anymore. Someone joked about starting a petition to make the trash can a permanent fixture in the neighborhood. Another suggested renaming the cul-de-sac after it. By the time Karen stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind her, the mood had shifted completely. What had started as tension and frustration had transformed into camaraderie and shared amusement. After the meeting, Alex found himself surrounded by neighbors eager to chat. People who had once avoided him or worse, sided with Karen, now treated him like a folk hero. "I can't believe you actually did that," one man said, shaking his head in disbelief. "She totally deserved it." Others chimed in, sharing stories about their own frustrations with Karen and thanking Alex for standing up to her. For the first time in years, the neighborhood felt united, not against Karen, necessarily, but in spite of her. The absurdity of the trash can saga had brought people together, giving them permission to laugh at something that had once caused so much stress. And while Karen continued to file complaints and send angry letters, her influence was waning. Neighbors stopped taking her seriously, and even the HOA board seemed reluctant to engage with her increasingly irrational demands. Alex knew the battle wasn't entirely over yet, but he could feel the tide turning. The trash can had done its job. It had exposed Karen's pettiness and reminded everyone that life didn't have to revolve around rules and regulations. Sometimes, all it took was a little creativity and humor to remind people what really mattered: connection, community, and the freedom to live without constantly looking over your shoulder. Still, Alex wasn't naive enough to think Karen would give up without a fight. He suspected she'd try one last desperate move to reclaim her authority. But whatever she planned next, Alex was ready. After all, he'd already proven that sometimes the best way to deal with a bully was to give them exactly what they deserved in the most unexpected way possible. Karen's final attempt to reclaim her authority came sooner than anyone expected. Just days after the disastrous HOA meeting, she called for a special election. Her goal was clear: to oust the current board members and install herself as the undisputed leader of the neighborhood. She even went so far as to print flyers with bold headlines like "Restore Order to Our Community" and "Stand Against Chaos." Underneath each slogan was a grainy picture of Alex's trash can, circled in red as if it were public enemy number one. At first, Karen seemed confident, almost smug. She hosted impromptu gatherings on her front lawn, handing out lemonade and cookies while preaching about the importance of rules and unity. But the more she talked, the clearer it became that her campaign wasn't resonating. Neighbors nodded politely during her speeches but quickly changed the subject when given the chance. Some openly admitted they didn't see the point of replacing the current board, especially over something as trivial as a trash can. Others joked about how Karen's obsession had gone too far, comparing her to characters from reality TV shows. Alex watched all of this unfold with quiet amusement. He didn't need to do much anymore. The neighborhood had taken on a life of its own. People were sharing memes online featuring photos of the infamous trash can, captioned with things like "the trash can that took down Karen" or "glitter justice." Kids continued to decorate it with balloons and streamers, turning it into an unofficial landmark. Even the local news caught wind of the story, sending a reporter to cover what they called the Battle of the Bins. The segment aired during the evening broadcast, complete with interviews from neighbors who praised Alex for standing up to Karen. But perhaps the most telling sign of Karen's decline came when a group of homeowners decided to organize their own event, a block party. They invited everyone on the street, including Karen, though no one expected her to show up. The theme? Trash Can Appreciation Day. It was equal parts celebration and satire, with games, food, and music centered around the idea of embracing quirks and individuality. Someone even made a cake shaped like the glitter-covered trash can, complete with blinking lights and edible glitter. On the day of the party, the entire neighborhood turned out. Tables lined the street, filled with potluck dishes and desserts. Kids ran around playing tag, while adults chatted and laughed, many holding plates piled high with food. At one point, someone suggested taking a group photo with the trash can as the centerpiece. Dozens of people gathered around, smiling and cheering as the camera clicked. It was a moment of pure joy, a testament to how far the neighborhood had come since Karen's reign of terror began. Karen, predictably, did not attend. Instead, she stayed inside her house, peeking through the curtains as the festivities unfolded outside. Later that night, she submitted her resignation as head of the HOA, citing personal reasons. No one pressed her for details, and honestly, no one cared. The neighborhood had moved on without her. In the weeks that followed, life returned to normal, or rather, a new kind of normal. The HOA meetings became shorter and less formal, focusing on practical issues instead of nitpicking minor infractions. Neighbors started spending more time together, hosting barbecues and game nights, strengthening bonds that had been strained by years of tension. And while the trash can remained a topic of conversation, it eventually faded into legend, a funny story people told at parties or brought up whenever someone complained about petty rules. As for Alex, he swapped out the glittery monstrosity for a standard trash can after a few months. But he kept the original safely stored in his garage, a trophy of sorts. Occasionally, he'd bring it out for special occasions like Halloween or the annual block party, which had become a beloved tradition. Each time it made an appearance, it sparked laughter and nostalgia, reminding everyone of the time a single trash can managed to unite an entire neighborhood. Looking back, Alex realized the real victory wasn't defeating Karen, it was proving that sometimes, the best way to deal with absurdity is to embrace it. By turning Karen's obsession into a source of humor and connection, he had helped transform a divided community into something stronger and more resilient. And though he never planned to become the neighborhood hero, he couldn't deny that it felt pretty good. The saga of the glitter trash can that took down Karen became a cautionary tale and a heartwarming one. It reminded everyone that life doesn't have to be perfect to be beautiful. Sometimes, all it takes is a little creativity, a lot of patience, and maybe a touch of glitter to make the world a brighter place.